Okay folks, we have filled the sand in the base, put sand in the base, but it's impossible to get it completely full back into the corners. And so, take a look down in here if you will. I have a large tube sticking up about, looks like about 10 to 12 inches. And if you fill that tube with sand, the vibration from the hammer will settle it back into the corners, and you'll have to do this for maybe a month or two until it just won't vibrate anymore. And then your base will be completely full. Now I want to introduce to you the new member of the Ozark School, Ian Willie, who is the resident blacksmith teacher in training. And by the way, some of you may recognize Ian because 2 weeks before he went to work with me, he won the anvil, the Ozark pattern anvil at the BAM conference. Ian and I are going to show you how we fill the sand in the tube. I put the funnel in there. Actually, in this case, I'm using two funnels because I don't have a long, flexible funnel that will do it with one funnel. So you just keep pouring sand in until the tube is full, and then you stop. That's good enough right there. Okay. Now then you stop and go to work with your hammer. All right, I'm just going to go right down here and put this. Good enough, okay? Okay, folks, we're going to talk about now and demonstrate and show you how to align the belt. The motor has to be absolutely 90 degrees to the rotation of the flywheel because we have a flat cogged Gilmer type belt, which is like a timing belt, if you will. Now, all flat belts, in order to run absolutely perfectly true, need a raised surface on one of the pulleys, only one of the pulleys. We do not have that here. And so it's almost impossible to adjust the belt where it will stay in one place. So what we do is we keep adjusting the motor and squaring it until the belt is running, and I'm showing you slightly moving. When we move it to one side, it will kind of want to stay there, or it'll want to move over very slow, and we get it to where that alignment of the pulley is essential to the long life of both of the belt. Once they're aligned, you never have to align them again unless you take the motor out. So we move over to the hammer now. I wanted to show you this visually out where you could see it because it's hard to see this on the hammer. So we move over visually to the hammer now, and the motor has 4 bolts. If you take a look here, it has 4 bolts. One you can see here, I think, the light slightly. One here, one on the other side, 2 in the front. And those are the 4 bolts that hold the motor to the frame. There are 4 additional adjusting bolts.
Can you point the frame up?
The frame is here. This is the frame of the hammer, the base. All right? Now, this hammer is also supplied with 4.
Show the motor mount bolt.
The motor mount bolt. These are the motor mount bolts.
And there's 4 similar to that.
And there's 4. This one and one on the other side, and 2 up front, just like that. Those hold the motor down to the hammer base. Okay, now, we've also supplied 4 adjusting bolts, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. And you can push that motor any way you want to push it to make it line perfectly so that the belt runs. Let me put my hand over this way so that the belt runs as much as possible in the center, as I described to you earlier.
Could you put your hand down there and show it again where you want that?
Right here, just the way I showed you before. over there with the loose one. So you can look here and tell we've turned it on, and it's running far to the far side of the motor, which means the motor is crooked, as I show you with my hand here. So what we have to do is adjust the motor back around till it's absolutely 90 degrees from the rotation of the flywheel that it's turning. Now, that's really a tricky thing to do, because what we're aiming to do here, this motor, first of all, this pulley that's driving has teeth, but the flywheel does not. So we have to have enough tension on there to keep the flywheel, the motor from the belt from slipping. Well, as it turns out, it works just fine. If you adjust the tension on the belt to the maximum load of the hammer, which on this 7.5 horsepower motor is 34 amps. So what we're going to do, that's under full load. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust this motor around square, and then we're going to push it back, but with the adjusting bolts, until the amp meter that you'll see over on the far side.
Just one real quick second.
Yes.
I want to make sure I got the FLA. It says 37.5
Well,
through 34.5. Is that what I'm looking at?
yes, we're working at, look at 34.5 is what you're looking at.
I got it. Okay.
Okay. So anyway, on the 50 kg hammer, or the 110, has a 5 horsepower motor, and that would be 22.5 amps. Okay, are you getting that?
I got that.
Okay. Now, so what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the motor around till we get it square, and then we're going to depress the treadle so that the ram is running full stroke, but not quite touching the dies. And then, at that point, that is the same as if you were forging. Same load on the motor as if you were forging, because what you're physically doing, it's even harder on the motor a little bit. What you're doing is throwing that 135 pounds down and catching it midair and bringing it back up. That's a real load on the motor. And so we set the amperage there, and the belt will not slip, okay? The belt will not slip until it gets down below 30 amps. And so, now, how do you know if your belt is slipping? It will sound like, when you're forging, it will sound like your motor is slowing down. Well, your motor's not slowing down, your belt is slipping. So now you need to take your amp meter under full load, and I'm going to switch over to a 50 kg hammer on 220. But in checking amperage, you only check 110. So you take either one of the lead wires that comes to the motor and to the switch, and we put the amp meter on that. Okay, and then you turn your amp meter on and put it to 40 amps. And then depress your treadle. You can do it standing right here until the ram is almost hitting, the die is almost hitting. All right, just touching is okay. And check the amperage that you're pulling. Keep adjusting your motor to make sure that you've got it in line and you're pulling 34.5 amps. You can pull 36 amps, it's fine. You can pull even 37 amps. After you get over 38 amps, you start overloading the bearings, okay? But try to stay above 30, and it's better to be 34 or above a little bit.
Now that's on
that's on the 60 kg hammer. On the 50 kg hammer, we're at 22.5 is optimum on the motor. You can go as high as 26, 27 without hurting the motor. After 29 and above, then you start putting an overload on the motor bearings and the shaft, and you'll have a failure there. So there's a broad window that we got to work with. On the 50 kg hammer, it will not slip until you're down around 17 or 16 or 17 amps. So there's 18 amps through 25 5 or 6 amps window that you've got to work in. Now, I can say that to the best of my knowledge, many of these hammers that were sold in 2000, when I sold the first hammer, are still running today, have never been adjusted. And I have never sold a belt. I sold one belt where a sprocket went bad, and it ruined the belt. But as far as wear, we've never had one. Even very few of them have even been adjusted, much less replaced.
Tom, does the electrical motor, is it ball bearing and permanently lubricated, or does it require maintenance?
No, the motors are permanently located. They're sealed bearings.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there's no maintenance to the motor.
I noticed it did have some plugs in there like you used to put oil on there,
Well,
but you don't use that.
You do not use that. No. Well, now this particular motor is a new designed motor. This is the first batch we've gotten, and they do have an Allen screw there, but there's no instructions come for lubricating, but there is a lubricating hole on these, but of the more than 200 that I've sold, we've had no failure of motors during the warranty period, and we've only had like 2 or 3 of them go bad over the years. So they're a Marathon motor, and they're very good, but Marathon has made some changes, and we're seeing the first changes coming through here, and we anticipate that they'll be just as good or better than they were before. Okay. Now, the next thing we want to do is start aligning. We have to turn the motor on, see where the belt is running. Turn the motor on. Disengage the ramp. Disengage. Pull it back. Now, this is not a real safe practice, but we do it anyway. I take a box end wrench or an open end wrench and push the belt over. That belt won't push over, so it means we're out of line this way. This way. So shut the motor off. Now we're going to realign that motor, and we're going to try to square it with the hammer a little bit closer. This was just an initial setup, kind of a guessing at it. Now we're doing the fine tuning. Okay, Ian, I'm going to let you do that. Did you loosen your motor bolts yet?
Yes, the motor bolts are loosened.
Okay, now do not loosen the rear. The front ones doesn't matter. The 4 that hold the motor to the frame, they're the ones I'm talking about. Loosen the front ones as much as you want to. But take a look at me with the camera. But what happens, the tension on the belt will raise the motor forward towards the flywheel. So you do not want to loosen the rear bolts so that the motor can raise that much. We've got good adjusters that'll push it around. If you raise it up too much, you'll get a false reading. As soon as you tighten it down, you'll increase the tension on the belt. And that is, then you'll have to do the whole thing over again to make sure you've got the right tension when all the bolts are tight. Okay, you're going to push that back. Am I loose here? I got to come loose with this side. I am loose.
Yes.
Okay.
Everything's loose.
You got, with 4, you got to tighten that one. Push her on around and let me look. Okay, now what have we got? We still got a slack belt. You must have.
Yes, I'll loosen that one up some.
Too much, yes. Tighten that back now. Because we didn't have to move so much, I don't think. We were pretty close. Once this hammer has been adjusted, you would never touch the outside adjusting bolts. You would, I've put fine threads on the adjusting bolts, so you would only need to use the one that's in the, if you need to tighten the belt. Now you're getting close, aren't you? Okay, let's turn it on again now and see how it runs. You would only need to adjust. Now let me see your wrench. You need to go a little more. You see? Tighten that one. What's your ampage? Okay, you need to tighten the belt more. So go from here. Hold it a minute, look at your belt, see what it's doing. Keep going. You need to go more. Push back more. You're getting close. Yeah, come on. You're getting very close. Oh, don't do that with that adjustable. With that. Do it with the other end of your wrench. Now you see the belt is staying in place, or it's moving very slightly, which means that now we are lined up with the motor and the flywheel. Okay? What is the ampage?
22, 23.
Now you have to. Okay, now you have to push the motor back some on this side. What your amp is doing. Here, wait a minute. We got to get full. We got to get it under full load. Put the ram back. What's your load now?
32, 33.
Tighten it a little bit more. Tighten it a little bit more. I want about 35. 36 maybe.
34, 33.
That's good enough. When you tighten the motor, it'll tighten up a little bit. Okay, now shut it off and tighten the bolts down on the motor, the 4 bolts that hold the motor down.
Okay.
You don't have to tighten the front ones, tighten just the rear ones at this point. It's a 17 millimeter.
Go.
Okay, now this is 17 millimeter bolts on all of this. We're going to tighten the back side of the motor down only, and we're going to double check our amperage, because if we pull the motor down much, it'll tighten the belt.
And those are 17 millimeter?
17 millimeter wrench you use here.
These lock nuts are 19 millimeters.
But the bolts are 17.
Yes, all of these bolts are 17.
All right, now we're going to turn the hammer on again now. We know we've got the belt lined up. We're going to push the pedal down and get the hammer operating. Where are we now?
37, 38.
We're a little too tight.
Yes.
Well, turn it off. Okay, we're pulling a little too much amperage, which meant we had the motor up too high. And now we're going to have to adjust it back forward just a little bit. Now we're going to adjust it forward depending upon how the belt is running. If you need to back off on the near side of the motor a little bit, I want that belt over to the motor a little bit more.
Okay.
So you're going to have to back this off about 3/4 of a turn. And you have to tighten this one over here to push the motor back around more. About a turn and a half. Loosen that up about 3/4 of a turn. And that's not much with a fine thread. That's enough. Now come with this one here. Push the motor forward on the off side. You can flip that. Keep going. That'll push tight because the bolts you haven't loosened your bolts.
Yes.
You got to loosen the bolts just a little bit. Okay, now that we have readjusted the hammer a little bit, it was too tight. We've readjusted the belt. We're going to try it again. Okay, in, turn it on. And what you got?
34, 35.
Perfect.
That's what does. Tighten it down.
Tighten them down. They won't take no more than you loosened it. We'll check it one more time. But it won't be. Okay. All right. Let's do it again. What you got?
Going up to 36 to 38.
We need to go a little more.
Yeah, we do.
Shut it off. We need to push it just a little bit more. Don't loosen them. One flat's enough to loosen because these bolts can push it.
Okay.
If you tighten that, you're going to have to loosen the other side. What we need to do now, our belt is in good shape.
Do we just need to loosen
Just loosen this one a 1/4 of a turn, or less, one flat. A little more. All right, now then, tighten the bolts back down. And we should be 35 to 36 or so now. All right, now then, did you tighten your other bolt on the far side?
I didn't even loosen that one.
Well, I don't know how you moved it then. I don't know if it moved or not then. Okay, let's go again, try it. What you got?
35 to 37.
Perfect. Okay, that makes the belt just a little bit tight, will not hurt the motor, and it'll give it longevity in case you get a little oil or grease. These motors, by the way, will run on, if they get oil on them, as soon as you flip that oil off, these belts, I mean, they'll work just fine. I wouldn't put oil on it, but if there's any oil gets on it a little bit, it may slip for a few minutes. Don't mess with the adjustment. Don't mess with cleaning your belt. Just run it a little while. It'll throw that oil right off and it'll be as good as new again. One of the other final checks we do is we go back and look at the pulley and the belt and the pulley and see that there is a little slack on both sides. You can see there, it's not running against either side. That's perfect adjustment, okay? And now we know that the motor is lined up exactly right. And folks, believe me, you never have to mess with the outside adjustments again. If you have to adjust it, it will be only with these front or the near the pulley adjustments. And 1/4 of a turn on the adjusting bolt goes a long ways towards tightening or loosening the belt. Okay, this is the adjusting bolt we're talking about. You can push it back, or you can go to the outside one and push it forward, okay? After you get all your adjustments done, then you'll take your lock nuts and lock it in place. But it's not going anywhere anyway because we're actually tightening it down tight with the 4 bolts that holds the motor to the frame. I might also add something for you. I have underneath that, instead of having nuts, I've got a plate on each side that goes from this bolt all the way up to the front one. Those plates are threaded, so that makes it really easy to put it together. It makes it easy to loosen them and not have to have a wrench underneath to hold the nut. And so little things like that, I have tried to make all the way through this hammer. I've tried to make things user-friendly. And so that's just another one of the small things that most people don't think about. Okay, and by the way, there's one other thing we was talking about, the idle adjustment on the hammer from up above. That is fixed for life. But this,
Point to that, and again, let me.
but this one up top that we worked on before, with the lever and the shaft, that is the valve we worked on before. Now that is fixed for life. But down here on the bottom, we've got the stop for the treadle. You see me moving it up? That's the treadle's up, and it comes down, and it's a stop. Well, this adjusting bolt here may wear into your rod there just a little bit and slow down the idle. Well, then you can readjust it by pushing it up just a little bit. You can also let it down a little bit to slow the idle down now. If the idle is too far, you can do it from right here. You can just let this nut down, this bolt down, unloosen the lock nut, up if you need more idle and down if you need less idle speed, okay? And while we're in here, down beneath here, this rod here is attached to a spring below, and that's the treadle tension spring. And this little bolt right here, this nut on this threaded rod, simply tighten it down to make the treadle stronger. I have it where it's nice and positive, but not hard to push. And this treadle, while we're talking about the treadle, one thing I didn't mention earlier is this treadle is designed for you to be able to work around on the side, around in front, on either side. It's a very user-friendly treadle. See what I mean? We're going to put back on the cover. You got it going right? That covers the belt. This cover simply protects the belt from any oil that might come out of the piston. Now we're going to put the cover back over the belt that we took off for lining the belt. And what that cover is for is to keep oil off of the belt. This is the rear cylinder, the lower half of the rear cylinder, and it's an oily cylinder naturally. And occasionally, especially if you're over oiling, you'll have oil dropping down on your guard here. And we don't want it on the belt, so we put a guard over the belt with a lip over here to keep it from running off, and it'll run down and drop off beyond the motor and be out of harm's way. Okay, folks, what I'm going to do is show you two things. Your connecting rod that runs the rear piston that generates the air has to be broken in half in order to get a belt on. So what we've got here is two bolts on a flat plate. You cannot get it on wrong. These simple bolts, and these bolts have nylock nuts so they won't vibrate loose. And they're connected to the bottom half. This rod is connected to the bottom half, which I'm going to turn it back up and show you. But you have to take those off and then raise the cylinder up. You can raise the cylinder up simply by turning the crankshaft, taking the bolts off when they're a little bit high, and then run the crankshaft back down, and the piston rings will hold it in place. It will not fall. It's aluminum piston. So let's turn it back up a little bit now, reverse up. And I want to show you the big bearing that is a sealed bearing, never needs maintenance, self-centering bearing, so that it takes up any misalignment of the connecting rod and the piston and all. It compensates for that. And those are really good bearings. Those bearings cost me $100 each to put on there, and they're good. There's one other thing I want to show you about the hammer as far as just general maintenance goes, and that is that the Say-Mak hammer is two parts. The anvil is one part and the hammer is one part. And the whole anvil is dovetailed into the hammer, and it's held in place by three large bolts. Now those large bolts are hidden behind this protective cover, which has three bolts in it, and I've already loosened this one for time's sake. Three bolts in it that a 13mm wrench handles. These bolts have a huge spring behind them, like a spring on a little giant hammer, very similar to that. And I'm going to swing around this side. Now, here's again, takes a deep socket in a metric size, and I didn't have one. So here we are, folks, we're blacksmiths. I took a piece of pipe that was the right dimension. This is about 1.5 inch pipe. And then I hammered my hex to fit the nut that's inside. And these, okay, those are nice and tight. And those are nice and tight. And that one took a little tightening. Let me explain to you what's going on inside there. These hammers were first made when I got the first ones. Those bolts came through really tightened way down on the nuts were way down on the bolt. They had that spring really compressed a lot. And I looked at those, the three of them. One hit me in the shin, one hit me in the knee, and one hit me above the knee. And I know about springs breaking, and I just took them apart. And boy, they just took a lot of unwinding to take them apart. And so it frightened me. The thought of one of those breaking would be a projectile coming out. So what I did was a test. I took one of these hammers, and 10 feet out across the floor, I set another hammer with a wooden base crossways. And I went inside with the torch and I cut that head off. And that bolt lost about 2 or 4 inches of trajectory, 10 feet out, and stuck in that oak timber. So I said, we cannot have this. It's too much liability. I did one thing. They didn't come with covers in the beginning. And also, there's no reason to tension that spring so tight. So there's a piece of pipe inside over the bolt underneath the spring, and it allows you only to tighten it so tight. You cannot get it too tight. So, but we still have the cover over the front. And so if you were to take the bolt and cut it off inside, it would hit this cover and it would stop there. And now we've got a safe situation. So whatever happens to you in the life with your hammer, please do not take this cover off. It's a safety factor, and I doubt seriously one of those big bolts would ever break. But then airplanes are not supposed to crash, but occasionally one does. And so I'm going to put it back together, and that'll end this session. There are 4 bolts in this. I said there were 3, but there are 4. And they are right here somewhere. Where'd you put them?
Behind the ram.
Behind the ram. Takes a 13 millimeter wrench to put these on, take them off. Okay, my 13 is here. And right quickly we'll put this back in operation. While I'm doing this, I just want to tell you that always think safety around your hammer. And I can never repeat it enough. Repetition is the mother of learning. The more we do things and the more we think about them, the better we can be at doing them and the safer the action can be while we're doing them. These bolts will never shake out, and in your lifetime you should never have to take this cover off. So I can't imagine ever having to take that cover off. Next, I want to move.
What's the length of that pipe?
Well, this pipe is too long, but this pipe, you would only need a piece of pipe about 6 or 8 inches long, 1.5 inch pipe. Or, if you like, and you have them, you can have a nice deep socket. That is, I don't know, I haven't measured it, but it's a large, very large socket. Would be expensive, and it's easy to hammer this into a hex. that fits the nut perfectly. Okay? What I want to tell you is a couple of things, little bitty tidbits of information. In the life of this hammer, you should never have to take the cylinder head off. And the only reason you need to take the cylinder head off if you're going to take the ram out. If you were to do one of those stunts of damaging your ram guide, then you may have to pull the cylinder head off. And so there are 8 bolts. It takes a 17 millimeter wrench to take these bolts off. And then for your convenience, we've put 2 push screws, one on either side, that will break the seal and bring the hammers up. It makes it really easy to take them off. But let me caution you, if you ever do that, make sure that you loosen those again, because when you go to tighten your head back down, if you haven't loosened those, then the head won't seat. All right? The same thing is true with the piston head. Now this doesn't come off quite as easy. You have to take off the cover. You have to take off these hoses. This hose, the hose here that you can see, this hose pipe, and then take this bolt. This is a bolt actually. This is a flat there for a 14 millimeter. You unscrew that, then the cover comes off with both exhaust pipes. Inside this cover is a reed valve that you should never have to touch in the life of the hammer. The valve opens to let air in. It closes so that it's got compression. It's a big washer type affair, and I increased. It was good when we started. I increased the size and the thickness of this so that they wouldn't wear in your lifetime. Some of the previous hammers that I know of had problems with those, and so I learned from their mistakes or for their shortcomings. Now, if you should ever have to replace, like this particular hose, it's too short. You couldn't replace it. There's not enough room to work with there. The original hammers, well, first of all, let me say, I have put couplings here, like pipe couplings, here and in the back. You take all this off the top, and you can loosen those couplings, and the whole assembly can come out, and you can replace that hose. You can also access the valve when you're taking that out. Now, a little common sense goes into play here. You just need to see which hoses you have to take off to get this apart. There, at the bottom, there's only one coupling, but you don't really need it. There's a long hose, one single hose, about, oh gee whiz, it must be 9 inches long, and there's plenty of room to bend it and put it on should you have to replace that hose. And of course, these hoses up here are easy to replace without removing anything. Now, and so is this one. You can just pick it up and set it back down. Now, all of these hoses are available at your automotive store. So just take the hose to the automotive store if you have to replace one, and that's the best way of doing that. All right, that covers that subject very well. But if you ever do have to take the piston apart, you have to break those 2 bolts that we talked about earlier on the side of the hammer, unloosen those, and the piston will come right out. Now there is I do want to talk about that for a moment. There's a situation there where one piston has 2 sizes. It's big on top, it's small on the bottom. There is also a piston ring on that small bottom piston that goes in the cylinder, and you cannot get to it with a ring squeezer. And what a nightmare it is. But those 2 cylinders come apart, so at the factory they put them together and squeeze the rings and bolt them together. But if you're going to repair it, how in the world can you ever start that ring in the bottom side? I went through everything in the world. I tried to super glue them to get closed. I did manage to put tape around them and compress the ring so it would go in, and the tape disappears almost immediately. However, I designed a clever, if you will, way of doing that. I had them bevel the top cylinder so that the ring goes in there and it squeezes itself. okay? And it works beautifully. Just let it go, take a wooden end of your hammer or something and bump the top of the piston, bingo, it'll go right in place. Then you have 2 rings on the piston you have to squeeze. Use this ring squeezer or 2 or 3 screwdrivers, whatever it takes, to squeeze those rings in place, and the piston goes right down. So it's very simple, and it's not likely you'll ever be in here. But if you do, you know a little bit more about it now. That is going to wrap up my session on working on the hammers. However, if we, when we ship this hammer to you, or even when I delivered the hammers, extra dies go inside the hammer. We take the side cover off, and there's a lot of room. There's a lot of room inside the hammer. We'll swing around and show you one of the covers that's off of another hammer. And it's a very good storage place. And it's out of the weather, and it's out of sight. And so people can't see them and pick them up because they're completely enclosed. We also, sometimes when you order tongs or other parts and things that we sell here, like hand hammers or whatever, if they're to be shipped with a hammer, we'll put all of that stuff inside the hammer. And the freight won't be affected at all because there's almost no difference in the weight. And then but the stuff will be in safe place, and you don't know where to get them, inside the hammer. There's plenty of room in there. There is one more thing I want to show you. In the most recent, last 3 years, this is in effect that we have redesigned. I've redesigned the hammer, and the hammer has a very thick plate on the back side, the other side from me now, and everything is bolted together to that one plate. This plate is, for the most part, it's for making the hammer look complete. But anyway, but should you need to get inside this hammer, and there are a couple of reasons that maybe you will need to, but the only reason would be if you had to replace the shaft that goes through here, if you have to replace the shaft that goes through, that operates your treadle, or if you have to replace the shaft that goes through to operate the air valve, then only 2 things I can think of you would have to go inside the hammer for. In that case, you must take this plate off. All 7, this is also a bolt, all 7 of these bolts here and all 4 of these bolts here, and then the bolts that go around it that hold it in place. It simply comes right off, and quite frankly, the way this hammer is made now, and the reason we've made this change is that it was really difficult to get plate that was always straight. So we'd bolt on our cylinder and we'd bolt on our flywheel down at the bottom, and they wouldn't be parallel to each other. So I got tired of, I taught them how to hammer the steel and make those all parallel. That got to be a bore. So we changed the design, and the earlier models are that way. So we changed the design and we put a 1-inch thick plate on one side, and we take that to the milling machine and we mill the surface of the ram cylinder, the piston drive cylinder, and the flywheel mounting all in one plane. So they're absolutely perfectly parallel to each other. And this reduces the friction that can occur when things are not in line properly. Now, in the old hammers that we had, all those were hand hammered and made parallel, but that's not the case anymore. But actually, this is so strong that this hammer operates, and we've done it at trade shows in Turkey, and with this plate completely off and not even on the hammer, and we did forging demonstrations and with a naked hammer. I would not recommend doing that, but it is strong enough to do that because it puts a lot of pressure on that plate and those bolts on the other side. That's how strong it's made. There's one more thing I want to say to you that have the older style hammers that I mentioned that we used to have to hand hammer. And those are easily identifiable because the plate is the same thickness on both sides, and there are no bolts to remove the cover. Well, it's very difficult to change this hose. It's almost impossible. And so I called that to the attention of the factory, and that's where we came up with the pipe couplers here that you can loosen up and slip the whole works right out to change that. But for those of you that would have the older hammers, would ever have to replace this hammer, you see the way they put them on at the factory was in assembly. They put the front ram on, cylinder on, and they put the hose at the same time. Well, boy, that was good for assembly, but it's not good for maintenance. So what you have to do is you have to take these pipes off here, take all these bolts out except one at the bottom, and I would recommend that you also take out the top die so that you can pivot now, and then you'll pivot it forward on that one hinge point, and sometimes that works, sometimes it does not. Depends upon whether or not that will hinge far enough on your hammer. If it doesn't hinge far enough, well then I suggest you put the die back in and put some kind of a vise or a protective to keep that ram from falling off while you're sliding the ram forward a little bit. You don't want the dies. Put a keeper on it of some kind, or at least do it with your big flat dies so you've got more room to work with there. And be careful at that point, because you've got 110 or 135 pound ram here, and you've also got this big cylinder. It's heavy. I've done that, and it works, okay? But it's not much fun, and it's not an easy task. I'm thinking about, I don't know if I can do it or not, I'm thinking about making a kit that will give you, or you could do that yourself. When you get your hammer apart, you can take these pipe fittings out of here and put couplers in there. That way you can then alleviate the problem. It might be the better way of doing it. I simply in my life have not had time yet to test that. But these couplers thread into the cylinder on both ends, the ram and the piston cylinder, the same way as a coupler would do, the one parts of the coupler. So there's no reason why I think that you couldn't do that. All right, folks. Now we're going to move into a segment that will be using your hammer and working with your dies, interchanging the dies, and I'm also going to demonstrate to you how to make a set of keys. I'm going to make one key, and then you will know how to make keys. Making keys also, after you learn to make a key, if you happen to have a bad key that doesn't fit good, then you will also know how to make one fit well. An old key, you can refit it and make it fit well. One of the things that I have that everyone should have, and you can make this so easy out of a piece of flat or round stock, this is 3/4 or 7/8, is a drift for driving the key that might get stuck in the dovetail, or maybe you've got one upset here from hammering it where it won't go through, where you can put your drift on it and drive it right on through. Okay? Now, you'll find, and I'll show you later on, but I'm going to tell you now, I grind my keys to a lot of relief so that it'll take quite a bit of upsetting before it will not go through the slot and the dovetail, and between the dovetail and the die. The ram and the die are the female and the male. Okay? Now, so this is a handy tool, and everybody, so simple. You take a piece of round stock, you make a piece of rectangular stock out of it, make sure that it goes into your dovetail where the key is, okay? And it goes all the way through. You don't want it oversized back here somewhere. All right, now later on I'm going to make a key, and I'm going to make the key out of a steel called 6150. This is the ideal stock for forging a key and not doing any grinding. 6150. 5160 is fine. 4140 is fine. You can use a piece of old axle. The keys, and you don't have to heat treat the keys if you use those materials. However, you can use the keys are made out of that you have are made out of 1050, and they are heat treated. And the heat treating or the higher alloys will reduce the tendency for steel to gall. One of the biggest problems that people have with their keys is they gall. Well, when I put my keys in, and I will show you this again later, when I put my keys in, I always lubricate them. And I always put them in the right direction, orientation, upside down or downside up. Now, so what I'm going to do now, first of all, is I'm going to show you some of the standard dies that are available. This die that I have on my hand here is a 3x6 flat die. It's actually a metric measurement, but it comes really close to a 3x6. This is a 3x5, and this is a 3x4. And those dimensions are very close. And here we have another flat die, which is a same as your drawing die, which we're coming up to, but it's completely flat. And this has not been radiused. You need to radius dies to your own liking, but you cannot have sharp dies on a power hammer, or you're going to have shoulders, create shoulders that will cause cold shuts. And next to it is the standard drawing die that's already been ground, and it has a flat section down the center about of 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch, has a 7-degree taper, and then the edges are radiused. The more radius, the quicker the drawing, and the less tendency to cause cold shuts, cause shoulders that cause cold shuts. Okay, well, I'm going to skip over this die. Actually, I'm going to move in different places here. And then the next die we have is the very same drawing die as the half of this, of our drawing die here. This one has not been finished ground out. And so half of it is drawing, and this is a fullering die. You can radius that to any radius that you like, but you want to take these sharp corners off. And the next die next to it is our fullering die. This is tremendous die for making leaves or spreading material mostly to the sides. A little elongation, but mostly to the sides. And you can do marvels with this particular die. And we'll come back on the back row here is a set of combination dies that have not been ground at all. They're flat here. Some people like a flat die there. And they're still completely flat here. And you can radius the corners and do anything with it you like. And you can do anything with this you like, but they have to be ground. You cannot forge with them in this condition. And next to this is a radical drawing die. This is a new die that I've just brought in and started using. It is a very radical drawing die, and it will cause very easily, quickly, and sometimes this is what people like to see, is contours, highs and lows in the material. And the highs and lows can be changed by how hard you hit and how slow or fast you pull your stock through the dies. And this next die is probably the world's most used die. This is a very narrow flat die with the corners radiused really well. And this die is most commonly used in Europe today and for centuries, or as long as hammers have been around. And this die is also the same die that industrial smeltering plants in the history, back to the old water wheels and everything, where they had hammers powered by water wheels that drew the smelted steel into bar stock or whatever. They used a die that was shaped just like this. Now we have another die that this die was especially made and designed for jackhammer points. The steep little points are done on this side, and the flat blades and the like are done on this side. And they come top and bottom, or you can use a flat die on top and this die on the bottom, either way. And this is just a sample of dies that we can produce. I have these made in Turkey. I'm going to turn it edgeways a little bit so you might be able to see it a little bit better. And that die will produce elements, and I think I'll get one and show you. Actually, if you give me any design of element that you want to make, it'll take a little while, but not so long. I can send that design to Turkey, and we get our best prices that way. And we can make that design anything you like. Let me step aside and get a sample of some I've made before. Okay, now here is a sample bar that I made up when I was learning to use these dies. And I actually made some of these bars that were finished. This is a rough one that was finished for Mr. Floyd Daniels Memorial Fence in Madison, Georgia. So this die fits right down. If you let me to move this to the side, there's what we've got, okay? And you can make this flat with sharp corners. I've broken the corners here in this by breaking it, or you can rotate it and make it completely round, which your choice on this hammer here. The learning curve is that you need to learn what size stock to start with to fill out the voids, because the material is going to, from this point up here, the high points is going to push to the center down to the low points. And so it's a little bit of a learning curve, but once you get it, boy, you can do marvelous things with those dies. And here's 3 elements in one bar, and you can make 1, 2, or 3 elements, whatever you want to do. I might also say that elements like this make really good door pulls or handles. You can cut them off here and then shape that into the 2 mounting points on a door, and it makes a really comfortable and nice feeling door pull or handle for our pokers or many other things that you might be making. Okay? I'm going to go through checking my hammer out in the morning before I go to work. There's a few little things one needs to look at, and also there's one little thing I wanted to cover that I didn't cover in the film, and that is that just because the treadle is hitting the floor doesn't mean that you're getting all the power. What you can do, you're not getting all the power until this lever is all the way down. I've got this one set a little bit high. I'm going to set it down just a little bit. I'll still have all the power because I've got my hammer set with the chain way out front, so I get quick throttle and I can get the whole travel of my power with my foot on the ground from 0 to full power. All right. Now, one of the things I do, I look the hammer over a little bit. I make sure that my oil is turned on because visitors in your shop occasionally will come by looking at your hammer and they'll mess with this. They'll turn it on too much or they'll turn it off. And you need to check that. If you have nosy people in your building, there's a little screw that holds that. Don't just take the knob right off. You can still adjust it with your finger or with a pair of pliers, and that'll be safe. But it pays to check that occasionally. I check mine every day. Also, check to make sure that your keys are tight. Just take the hammer, give them a bump. They are tight. They are tight. So, I just walk around the hammer and make sure that nothing is on the floor, especially round stock. Little round pieces of stock on the floor are dangerous. You'll step on them, you'll slip and fall and hurt yourself. But there's not much to check on this hammer. Periodically, I'll say maybe once a month, until you're comfortable with your belt tension, go and put your amp meter on and check, get your hammer running, and check your ampage to make sure that the proper ampage is being pulled. That means that your belt is in proper tension.
And review what is the amperage for each machine.
Okay, and of course, the proper amperage for the 50 kg is 22.5 amps. A couple of amps over that is fine. A couple of amps under that is fine, but don't let it get more under 20 because now you're starting to get in the danger zone of it slipping. So if it ever gets to 20, it's best to just tweak your motor back a little bit and tighten your belt with an amp meter to make sure that you are below at 25 amps or below 20 or above in that range of 5 amps. That's a lot of range. With the 60 kg, it's the same thing except you're working with 34 amp draw, and you can come down as far low as 30 and up as far as 37, 36, 37. And you're in a safe zone then. If the symptoms, again, let me remind you, because repetition is the mother of learning. Anyway, the symptoms of the belt being loose is when you're forging, it will sound like your motor is slowing down. What's going on here? My ram is slowing down, my motor is slowing down. The motor's not slowing down at all, the belt is slipping. So that's the time to get your amp meter quickly, check your amperage, and then before you go changing things, take a look and see if maybe some oil or grease has gotten on your belt. And I said earlier you don't have to do anything to clean it, but you can expedite the cleaning by shooting some WD-40 on the belt. WD-40 is really not a lubricant, it's a cleaner. And it will at least dilute any oil that's on there. And so shoot a little WD-40 on the belt while it's running, and that'll clear things up in a hurry. And then forge it for a few minutes and make sure you're slipping. It may have been that your belt was slipping and did not need to be adjusted. Because if you adjust it while it's got oil on it, you'll have a hard time getting the proper adjustment. And if you do, when that oil is gone, it'll be way too tight. So those little things, simple things, if you know about them. They're not so simple if you don't know about them. And I hope I've explained that to you. Well, I'm going to work this morning, and I have a hammer here. In fact, during the next, most of the balance of this film, I'm going to do some forging for you. I'm going to change the dies. We talked about the dovetails and the dies before, but we didn't actually show about changing the dies. So I'm going to, I've got flat dies in my hammer this morning, and I need drawing dies. Now, I'm fortunate in that I have two hammers, and I have drawing dies in one and flat dies in another, but you will not have that luxury necessarily. So you will have to change your dies from time to time. They're very easy to change. When changing the dies, you need two hammers for the upper die. Now I'm starting to work this morning, and I've got flat dies in my hammer, and I want drawing dies. Now we're here again. I want to go over this again with you. When you're hammering on the top key, put a backup. I got a little heavier hammer around here with a backup, and I've got my thumb, what's left of it, okay, up to catch the key so I don't knock it all the way out. So I'm going to hit it hard in the beginning, and now I'm going to not see it. It was loose, and I caught it with my hand. And the reason I'm using a backup is, again, this is a bearing. It's got a piston on top. If you go to beating on this, you are putting stress on them that's unnecessary. They'll take it because it's a big old bearing. But why abuse something that doesn't have to be abused? Now, you don't have to have a backup on the bottom one because it's solid. It's part of the anvil. But I guess it's already coming, so I'm tapping slow. And I'm holding my hand in the back to make sure it doesn't go flying across the room, and also that my hammer doesn't go in and do damage to my dovetail, male or female. Now, I'm going to go back to the other side, and I'm going to just tighten those this much because I need to raise the ram, and I don't want that to be falling out. I need to raise the ram, put my stopper in it, now I can knock the keys out, no problem up here, knocking the key loose. I always change my bottom die first. I'm going to knock the key back just a little bit. And I take my, now here again, remember, we've got the bottom with a B on it, and it's sticking up, and we want to make sure it goes back in that way. It's a nice fitting key, very nice. Now I'll take the die out and place it aside, wherever you store your dies. Now I've taken my bottom die out. I'll go get my drawing dies, and now I want to check, see which is the top and which is the bottom. Remember, we have the beveled edge. That is the parallel to the die itself, and the back side. So I put that side to me, and I look at this side. Oh, it's tapered. This is tapered from the right, which means when I go, it's the upper die. I need to go to the bottom die. I'm not going to assume anything. I'm going to check it. Now, I got my bevel to me. The taper's over here. When I turn it down, it'll be the bottom die. I go put it in place, double check my key. I've got good oil on it from that last serving, so I won't have to put more oil. If I didn't, I'll put oil on it. And I put it in very lightly, the key. Now I take the top one out. I'm going to set it down here so you can see it. And then, what I do, it's hard to hold these up and get them in right. So what I do is I put my die on the other die. I push it back about 3/8 of an inch, and I knock the block out and let the ram fall. It'll fall right over the dovetail. If you have them lined up, it'll hit, because of the taper, the ram will hit the dovetail, the male part of the dovetail, and knock it off. So you just pull it back forward. And check your key to make sure that you're looking at the T, the top that goes up. And we've got oil. We don't have enough oil. Okay, that's the top. You got it?
I got it. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm going to oil just a little bit. I'm going to put a little oil on this side and smear it with my finger. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. But I can see, if you could look, you can probably pick it up here. See the scuff marks on that key? All of those scuff marks mean it's making contact at all those places, and that's perfect. That's the way a key should be. It doesn't take but a drop of oil. And smudge it on, and we are in business. Let me get rid of my oil can. Now this key is ready to go in, and double check again. I got the T up. Now stick it in lightly, and I'm going to wipe my hand with a rag always, because I'm going to my hand hammer next, and I want a good, clean, safe hand to work with my hammer. All right, now, from that point, we line up, take your hammer and very lightly, what do I do with the other hammer? Oh, they're both here. Take your, and line your top die. All of my dies are a little bit wider than the dovetail. So I'm going to line my die up so that there's the same amount sticking out on top as there is on the bottom. I'm going to snug it, and I'm going to take the big hammer, pull the back up, and I'm going to drive it good and solid. Not with a sledgehammer. That's tight enough. This type of system is so strong that if you drive this hard enough, you can break the dovetail, just separate it. You'll see a lot of little giant hammers around the country that the dovetail is broken off. People who could not fit their keys properly tried to drive that key and make it hold. The key wasn't right. It's never going to hold. So what you do is you destroy a very expensive ram or an expensive sow block dovetail. So now I'm going to line my bottom up with the top. And remember I said earlier, I leave about 10 thousandths, maybe 15 thousandths sticking out on the bottom die here in case I'm going to do, and I am in my demonstration later, going to do a kind of I'm going to do a tenon. And if those dies aren't lined up like this, you'll damage your work. You'll damage your tenon. Now, I've got that in place. I don't need the backup hammer here, but I'll use it anyway. Nice and snug. That's enough. I'm going to get my hammers out of the way now and say that I need to check the alignment on my dies here. And I can feel it's very close, but it's not close enough. You need matching dies if you want good forging. So here again, I'm going to use my clamps. We showed you earlier. This has got a little bevel on it, so I put it up there. It stays. If I turn it around, it falls off. It stays. I'm going to put my clamp on the back side, and I am going to I'm a little bit ahead of myself here. I should loosen the die first, the key. So I'm going to put my hand over here to catch it from flying, and I'm going to knock the XY or the cell block key loose. Now I'm going to clamp my dies with this plate here and make them parallel to each other. Good and tight. And if your key isn't good and tight, just kind of tap your die a little bit. Make sure that they line up. Then come back around and tighten your key. Okay, double check to make sure you've got your lip there, and I have. It's perfect. So we'll get rid of our hammers. We'll take our clamp off. And now this hammer is ready for some good quality forging. The first thing I'm going to do is make a key. I'm going to make the bottom key here. I learned to make these keys from Clifton Ralph. Pete, you can machine them. You can grind them. You can do all kinds of things. Man, it takes forever to grind. Then you got to stick it in with some glue on it to make sure that you know where it's hitting, and grind some more, and it takes forever. But you can forge them in place. If you know how to do it. And Clifton Ralph taught us how. So what we do is we measure our key on the narrow side, on the back side. I use this to set my caliper with. I'm using a double caliper, and I'll explain this. I set that caliper right about there, and I want to forge the small end of my new key to this dimension, and then I set my large, and I told you before, my calipers have a knot on the side. That's going to be the large side. Sometimes they're really close and you can't tell when you're looking at them if you have two dimensions. So I put a knob there for the large side. I'm going to check my key on the back side, and I want to have it set for that dimension. But see how close they are? But there's 1 degree difference in them. So I'm going to forge the key so that it fits in this hole on the far side, on the narrow side, but it's undersized a little bit on the back side. So I'm going to forge to this dimension, but a little undersized, all the way back. And then we're going to take the rosebud and heat, drive the key in and make sure it's hitting, and it'll put your scuff mark there. Okay, now in the upsetting part, we've already forged our key so that we've got a section here that's about the same dimension as fits in the small end, okay? And we drive it in there to make sure it fits, and then we got a scuff mark there, and we know where we are. So we take the rosebud and we heat 1 inch of the key, of the material that we're making the key out of, in back of, towards the big end of the scuff mark, and we heat that with the rosebud. About 1 inch is enough. You're wasting your time. And quickly, because you got this hot, quickly quench that end a little bit. Right here, just quickly quench it. I'm going to be doing this every time so that when we're taking this out, it'll be cool enough not to upset. We don't want this end upsetting anymore. So we will then quickly, with this part here hot, I'll quickly quench it, come to the hammer quickly, stick it in the dovetail, and here I need a helper. It's better to have 2 people. You can do it by yourself. But you need a heavy forging hammer on the back side, a striking hammer, not a forging hammer, and have somebody hold that, and then with a good size hammer, upset this key 3 or 4 low blows, and that 1 inch will just swell out and fit the dovetail. And so you look at it and you take it out, it'll cool and shrink, and they will never stick. It'll cool, you can tap it right out, look at it. Now you can see, hey, I got a mark here, and then I got continuation of it. Just keep doing that, backing your way out until you have filled the dovetail with fit. Now you'll have the perfect fitting key. It'll go in and it'll go out. But this time I'm going to tell you though, I like to maximize everything I can. And now my dovetails are 7 degrees taper, so I put 7 degrees in my key. Now I estimate that. You can learn to do that. I don't measure it, but I can see it with my eye. That allows me to have maximum contact. This key is going to fit the dovetail full on that side. It's going to fit the dovetail full on this side. If it were square, you'd be a little short here, you'd be a little short over there on surface contact. Okay? Now, I'm also going to check very closely the diameter here, the thickness. Because if it's too thick, it will hold the die up off of the seat and give you a false reading. And when you start forging, then you're going to be forging against this key. And the key will come loose because you will have knocked it loose again. And so I always check that. You want a few thousandths clearance. I go for like 25 or 50 thousandths, it doesn't matter. I've got clearance there. Okay, now with that, if it is built up, you grind it? No, I grind it. I don't no more forging here because you'll spoil the thing. I go to my belt sander, my Bader belt sander, if you will, and I just take the grinder and grind that surface and go back and check it. Make sure that you've got clearance. If you only have 10,000 clearance, it'll be enough, but why not give a little more room in that? All right, now I'm going to make the key. And I'm going to take a piece of, I'm using 6150. It's not available very much anymore. It's an old spring steel, but it has a strange quality in it. The scale on this is so hard and sticky that it makes a really good surface for the key. Or, let me say it, after it cools, there's not going to be much scale on there because I'm not going to allow it to be much scale. But there is always mill scale. And so that particular material is less likely to gall than any I've ever used. 5160 is good, 4140 is good. And our dies come from the factory, are made out of 1050, 1045, and because they're so close to mild steel, or the common steel, these dovetails are also, let me do it right here. These dovetails, the ram and all, are also made out of 1050, and like materials with the same chemistry are very apt to gall. So please remember that. If you have a galling problem, then heat treating will minimize the galling. It won't completely stop it. So we make these out of the same material, but we heat treat the key. And then it's slicker than otherwise would be. If you take two common materials and drive them together that tight, I'm almost certain you're going to gall your key. And then galling is welding. And then when you drive it back out again, it's going to be all galled and messed up, and so is your ram, or so is your die. Wherever it galled, it's going to be messed up. You got to dress that off and start over again, or you can never have a key fit. If you look at, I noticed it most commonly on the old 25-pound Little Giants. There were over 9,000 of those made in this country, and they're great hammers. I have two of them here in my shop, a new style and an old style. I don't use them in my work, but it's really nice to have them, and sometimes we have classes. These hammers here are state-of-the-art hammers, been rebuilt by Phil Cox, and they are 100 times better than they were when they were new. But while I'm on that subject, you'll see many times where there's just dug out parts inside the female dovetail on the die. That's because there's been galling going on there. And you do not want to upset a key in that area because it'll swell out and get in those cavities, and you will have created a sculpture because it won't come out of there. You'll have to cut it out with a torch. I'm throwing this tidbit in because some of you will have older hammers, and maybe it'll be a benefit to you. If you're going to make a key for that, then you either need to mill or file that whole surface back to plain flat again before starting, both sides of the dovetail. And then, like I say, you see many of the old 25-pound Little Giants with broken off dovetail normally. And what has happened, I know what's happened. People have taken sledgehammers and tried to make that key fit, hold. It won't hold unless it fits properly. You put enough pressure on there, and it's like you can break granite stone with little wedges. That's the way they do it. Used to do it. They do it with dynamite now, but you can break granite stone, and they have the same taper we have here, like 1 degree. And they drive those down in there, and man, that's got tremendous power. And it'll break right off your dovetail. It'll just break your dovetail right off if you hammer it too hard. And believe me, these will not break if they're not abused. And if you break one, I'm going to review it, but I can tell you 99% it will not be warranted if it's 1 day or 1 year after you get the hammer. Because if it's a defective piece of steel, I will warranty it. Otherwise, it's your baby. Okay, now I'm going to start and get into my forging of the rough key. And I told you we have 7, I'm not sure, I'll repeat this again because repetition is the mother of learning. I'm going to completely tell you that so many times because it works with forging, it works with anything in life. The more you do it, the more times you do it, the better you'll become at it. The bottom key has 7 degrees tapered in one direction. The top key has 7 degrees tapered in the opposite direction. So the bottom key will not fit the top or vice versa. So and when you're making those, you have to forge them so that when you forge the bottom key, you will tilt the material to the left, okay? And this will give you the proper angle. When you're doing the top key, you forge it to the right, and this will give you the proper angle. And it's a little difficult to get that soaked into your head. And I've forged, in the beginning, I forged several of them in the wrong direction. And boy, it makes you mad because now you've ruined a piece of steel because there's not enough material left to correct that. This is a rhombus, if you will, a parallelogram to describe it properly. And it's most common to everyone who has any experience in blacksmithing.